Our work to build the African National Reparations Organization in the early 1980s was also motivated in part by an urgent need to unite the pro-independence sector of the U.S. front of the African liberation movement. Often considered a lunatic fringe by African liberals and white leftists because of our demand for reparations, our party's campaign to raise the demand for reparations to African people indeed struck many of these forces as lunacy in this period. Like the imperialist bourgeoisie, they were unable to concede the fact that the U.S. had built itself off enslaved African labor and other resources, both human and material. Or when they were able to concede this fact, they were incapable of believing in the efficacy of a reparations demand. I never forget when, we had a reparations office. I think our national office at the time might have been in Baltimore, Maryland. And the Jackal was running for president. That's Jesse the Jackal. Was running for president of the U.S., Jesse Jackal. And so the comrades allowed him to use our reparations office, you know, as his Baltimore or Maryland presidential headquarters. And they approached him about support for reparations. And he said something to the effect that, the reparations issue is not something that is relevant at this time, something to that effect. I mean, almost everybody now, including the NAACP, the Unitarian Church, almost everybody now has united with the reparations demand, but it wasn't that way then. And we look at people like Ron Dellums, who was recognized as the most radical politician in the U.S. Congress out of Berkeley, California area. When we approached Ron Dellums to support the reparations demand, we were told that he couldn't do it because most of his constituency were white labor unions and other white people, and they would be opposed to the reparations demand. And this was particularly significant to us because Dellums, in 1989, when the issue of reparations to the Japanese was put forward, Dellums, standing in the well of the Congress, literally crying copious tears, remembering when he was 6 years old, how his Japanese friends were carted off and put in concentration camps. And he supported the reparations demand for Japanese, but could not support reparations for African people. That's the situation that we dealt with in pushing forth the whole reparations demand. What you see in the world today in terms of the willingness and ability of people to accept and talk about the reparations issue is a consequence of years and years and years of struggle and work that the African People's Socialist Party has done. For our party, ANRO was an opportunity to promote the united leadership of the pro-independence tendency that had met a counterinsurgent defeat by the U.S. state and opportunistic white left, whose political lines have always been in contention with the struggle of African liberation under our own terms. ANRO was also seen as a means of winning the masses of our people to the reparations position by raising a question that the imperialists cannot answer and thrusting the colonized African population back into active political life independent of the capitalist Democratic Party. In a near repeat of the African National Prison Organization experience, various nationalist groups saw the party's leadership as the rise of the African working class and a threat to the prevailing outdated petty bourgeois nationalist outlook around the issues of reparations and revolution. While the party recognized reparations to be a function of the revolution, most of the others saw reparations as a payday to be achieved within the context of the existing colonial relationship. Our difficulties with various elements within the U.S. front of the African liberation movement were primarily based on contradictions left unresolved prior to the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s. The presumed tenuous unity of the movement of the 60s was being frayed even before the defeat of the revolution. But the defeat of the revolution resulted in an ossification of positions that did not have the benefit of development from practice. Party attempts to build ANPO and ANRO were efforts to unite our movement in practice while creating a forum of struggle within which ideological positions could be struggled around and developed. The intent was to move the revolutionary process forward despite ideological differences that we felt could be resolved through the test of practice. However, that was not to be. In fact, the process of building ANRO and ANPO served to illuminate and better define the contradictions. It was the test of practice in building these organizations that exposed the chasm of class differences separating the party from most others. The general unity extant within the liberation movement was based on the issues of self-determination and independence. All agreed that Africans should be independent of the U.S., white nationalist state power. However, questions of class and social transformation were generally unaddressed. In fact, their position on these issues is what had previously drawn most criticism against the Black Panther Party from many nationalists. The new Africanist tendency of our movement only began to identify itself as socialist after a blistering series of African People's Socialist Party polemics directed against the leading proponent of the tendency. Our polemics were initiated after the group was publicly celebrating unity and complicity with the U.S. counterinsurgency war against drugs, actually political cover for a war on our community that focused primarily on the African working class. The working class was the source of the militant anti-colonial resistance that had shaken the U.S. imperialist domain to its foundation. And the war against drugs was simply a part of the counterinsurgency mopping up process. Almost everyone is clear on this point today. However, it is the fact that ours is a party of the African working class that distinguished our position at the time. Like every party, we are simply the advanced detachment of a particular class. And since we have always been clear that ours is a party of the African working class, we have always defended the interests of the class even after the class has suffered severe defeat and pushed into a morass of demoralization and drug use. Another tendency within our general anti-colonial movement was Pan-Africanism, primarily in the form of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. Unlike the new Africanists, the AAPRP shouted its socialist credentials to the skies. However, while proclaiming themselves so-called scientific socialists, the science of the AAPRP never characterized their socialism as the ascension of the African working class to the position of ruling class and custodian of the independent, united socialist state. Instead, the so-called socialism of the AAPRP identified students as the critical social force for the socialism they were seeking from secure classrooms in various places in the world. Theirs was a middle class or petty bourgeois socialism. These were some of the ideological barriers that undermine all our efforts to unite the U.S. front of the African liberation movement. Similar barriers would reveal themselves with our work throughout Europe and Africa. These were ideological barriers that had their basis in class outlook or worldview. These barriers of differences in class outlook severely frustrated achievements of a strategic aim we had established to unite our movement after its military defeat and in the face of the ideological assault launched against it by the opportunist North American left. It was not until 1989, 7 years after ANRO's founding, when Ronald Wilson Reagan decided to grant a pittance of reparations to survivors of the U.S. concentration camps imprisoning Japanese during the Second Imperialist War, that some of the same organizations became believers in African reparations and decided to build their own coalition around the issue of reparations. Nevertheless, ANRO did succeed in putting the reparations demand on the political agenda for Africans within the U.S. and around the world. We took the question of reparations out of the classrooms, organizational conferences, and limited discussion groups and built a genuine mass movement around the issue. We popularized the reparations demand with common struggles, such as the numerous instances of police violence and murder people were familiar with in our various occupied communities. Obviously, I cannot take this occasion to review the entire 40 years of party history, although it is truly impressive. But I do need to touch on some other critical struggles and issues that are necessary for our understanding of our historical significance and our ability to take on the critical issues of today. The impact of the counterinsurgency led us to build the People's Democratic Uhuru Movement in 1989 in Oakland, California. By 1991, we transformed this organization to a national organization, and ultimately it became the International People's Democratic Uhuru Movement, our primary mass organization today. NPDOM was built to win the African masses back into political life and to expose and defeat the counterinsurgency. From its inception, NPDOM has led critical struggles around the various attacks on our community, political, economic, cultural, etc., in cities as distant and diverse from one another as London and England and Washington, D.C., and Oakland, California in the U.S. NPDOM has taken on issues of police terror, political prisons, education reform, inadequate housing, etc. Today, NPDOM has shared its defensive character and developed a revolutionary national democratic program. The changing conditions in the world, the rising motion of the masses demanding return of resources and liberty from a crippled imperialism, and the consistent work of our party have all contributed to a strategic difference in how NPDOM must move. Today, NPDOM is leading mass struggle with the intent to raise up the revolutionary national democratic forces within our colonized community to power. It has assumed an offensive as opposed to a defensive posture. The party's leadership of the masses reached a critical stage when on October 24, 1996, the St. Petersburg, Florida Police Department shot down an 18-year-old African, Tyron Lewis, in broad daylight in front of scores of witnesses in the African community. The police murder, which took place 3 blocks from the national office of our party, from this office, resulted in a fierce response from the African community. Police cars and corporate news vehicles were torched by the rebelling masses. Liquor stores and other white-owned businesses notorious for their unfair extraction of capital from an impoverished community were also targeted. The police and media used the ubiquitous presence of our party as a public rationale for blaming us for the uprising. This was especially because party members were correctly carrying out our responsibility to provide on-the-spot political education to the masses that explained the role of the police as the occupying army of a colonial state. Sort of like the work we were doing in August in England, taking it to the masses on the ground even as the uprisings were occurring. This gave the people's uprising a political character that unnerved the police and the bourgeoisie, both locally and within the federal government. Occasional spontaneous mass uprising, although annoying, are generally not something the bourgeois colonial state cannot handle. Sometimes these uprisings are actually helpful to the bourgeoisie as justification for greater repression against revolutionary movements. However, uprisings with political consciousness are different. This is because it is political consciousness that generally distinguishes spontaneous uprisings from revolutionary precursors. This was clearly a mass uprising with political consciousness. The bourgeoisie began an intense media campaign that targeted our party for repression. Police harassment directed at our movement became endemic. Organizers were arrested for selling our newspaper and for distributing political leaflets and pamphlets to the people. In a futile attempt to prevent our communication with the masses of our people, archaic laws were resurrected and new laws created to abrogate constitutionally guaranteed freedoms of assembly and expression. On November 13, 1997, 3 weeks after the police murder, hundreds of various military forces associated with the state and city, along with an assortment of neighboring police organizations, assaulted an NPDOM community meeting at our headquarters, this building, where we're having this meeting right now. In an attempt to silence our movement during a pre-announced meeting to expose the meaning of a grand jury report exonerating the police for the murder of Tyron Lewis, all the tear gas in the city's arsenal was unleashed on a room full of women, men, and children by armed police that surrounded the building. Several people, including some of our leading party members, were trapped in a tear gas-filled building. tear gas canisters were purposely shot in the trees in the back of our center, setting several trees afire. The police also attempted to burn the building by shooting the incendiary tear gas canisters onto the roof. Hundreds of Africans from throughout the community were doing battle with the militarized police in defense of our building and entrapped leaders. Let me just, I don't, since the time has already warned me in terms of the time, but I just have to mention this, that the building was configured differently when this happened. The platform was up in here, and the front was where this wall and windows are now. And what happened was, the police, I was speaking to the group that had assembled, even though the police had set up roadblocks to keep people from coming to the meeting. And someone rushed into the building and said, Chairman, the police say that this is an illegal assembly and we got 5 minutes to get out of the building. And as soon as he said that, tear gas started coming in the building. They started shooting tear gas into the building. You know, there were women in here, they had children. They were wondering where their children were, women screaming, trying to get to their babies. They had no regard for the people who were in this building. And some of the comrades were outside because the police were driving up and down, making a great display of their prowess and sticking guns out of the windows. And some of the comrades were outside, and some of them rushed trying to get back in the building. When they tried to get back in the building, the police would shoot tear gas canisters to drive them back. Mistake. So what happened was they had some of us trapped in the building. They got hundreds of young Africans out there making war against them, and they got leaders of the party trapped outside who couldn't get in, who had to give some kind of explanation and direction to all those people who were anxiously concerned about us on the inside of the building. So that's important. Hundreds of Africans from throughout the community were doing battle with the militarized police in defense of our building and entrapped leaders. When the police deployed a helicopter over the building, the people, conscious of the same police tactic used against the MOVE organization in Philadelphia in 1985, resorted to an armed response, bringing the helicopter down by gunfire. The intensity of the resistance. In the newspaper on the following morning, they released a transcript of the commander of that attack screaming, pull the troops back, we're under heavy fire. Pull the troops back, we're under heavy fire. I love that statement. The intensity of the resistance, clearly informed by political consciousness, alarmed the federal government. As a result, U.S. President William Jefferson Clinton sent a cabinet member to the city to attempt to resolve the situation before it might become a generalized model for resistance throughout the colonized communities within the United States. So here Clinton sends a cabinet member, I mean, to a little backwater, St. Petersburg, Florida, a little tourist town that they used to derisively refer to as God's waiting room, because it said all these nothing but old people here. So St. Petersburg was God's waiting room. That's how they referred to it. And now you got a member of the cabinet, president sending a cabinet member down here to try to bring some calm to this situation. In the process of this resistance, the party initiated a broad-based coalition involving sectors of the African primitive petty bourgeoisie that were motivated by the prospect of acquiring federal funds to appease the resistance. See, every time there's an uprising, wherever you are, the African petty bourgeoisie will go and say, boss, if you give us some money for our projects, we'll keep the Negroes from rising up again. So that's what they wanted to do now. But the problem was the government was already saying that we started it. So if we're the ones started it, the Negroes had a real problem, because how could they stop it if we're the ones who were controlling it? So in order for them to be able to go back to boss and say, look, we got a grip on this thing, they had to unite with the coalition that we were trying to build. We say, okay, we'll unite with you trying to get money from boss, but here are our conditions. One, you got to demand, first of all, that everybody who was arrested be freed. You got to pay reparations to the family of Tyrone Lewis. You got to punish the pigs who killed Tyrone Lewis, and then you got to say, hands off the Uhuru movement. That's the conditions. And so they united with that. And they united to control us, right? That's what the government, they have them control us. So you had Reverend Chickenbone and, you know, all of the people like that who came to this because they wanted money. And we knew what they wanted, money. And what we wanted was to build and deepen the revolutionary process while keeping them off of us at the same time. This was an important development because the coalition became a wall of black respectability surrounding our party and movement that made it difficult. And it made it difficult for the state to effectively employ a military solution against us with impunity. When the police attacked our building here and we were trapped in the place, there was a reverend in here with us. And he was going to go out. Anybody ever see the movie, The War of the Worlds? Anybody ever see the movie War of the Worlds? The original movie War of the Worlds, when the alien comes, there's this priest who's going to go out and help the priest to understand. You know, I guess he's going to do something with the soul of the alien. And the priest goes out and with his Bible and doing all of the, you know, the stuff that priests do with Bibles. Well, some of the stuff that priests do with Bibles. And he was incinerated by the alien. So our priest, our minister was going to go out and reason with us. Anyway, he said, he hadn't seen anything like that since Vietnam. He was crawling on the vehicles and what have you. They unleashed a barrage of tear gas and everything else that they had at this guy. I think he would have preferred War of the Worlds. But it was really important for us to have, you know, have the preachers there because he was able to go out and tell these wonderful stories to everybody about, you know, how the police were acting, and that was helpful. So we said that, yes.
There was also an African newspaper woman.
Yeah, there was an African newspaper woman. Yeah, this, you know, and they come to cover the stuff, and they were really rising stars. She was, you know, and out there, and when it happened, you know, she was under the news. she was under the news truck. I'm telling you, they came here. They used all the tear gas in the city. Can you imagine that? They didn't have any more tear gas when they, you know, they used all the tear gas in the city. And there was a brother who worked for the St. Petersburg Times at the time, and he said when he saw the helicopter, only thing he could think was move, that they were coming to do it again. But the difference was, like I said, outside this building, there were comrades who were ready to fight them, you know, and they did. And so I like the movie Black Hawk Down. We didn't have a movie, but it was damn sure a reality show, you know, and so Black Hawk was down, you know, right out here in front of this building, you know. So anyway, the coalition became a part of the method through which the party locked the colonial state in political struggle. We defined this struggle as a contest between a pessimistic public policy of police containment of our community versus an optimistic public policy of economic development for a population suffering economic quarantine by the government and capitalist financial institutions. During this process, the party also organized constant mass mobilizations to push the colonial state back and to bring greater organization, political consciousness to our people, enhancing the relative position of power occupied by our party. The party exposed the limitations of the state and ruling class and galvanized the African working class. Through its media and political mouthpieces, the bourgeoisie had claimed the African working class was inarticulate, uneducated mass without consciousness of its interests and aims. These same forces also claim that our party and movement did not represent the masses of African people. See, they read their own newspapers. That's why they were confused. With the political demands of our movement recognized by everyone as the voice of the working class masses, however, it became clear that the masses were very articulate and quite capable of spelling out our interests and aims. Through the mass mobilization and armed defense by the people of our movement and its leaders, it became recognized by the world that not only did we represent the people, but that the masses were willing to engage the most powerful military force available to the colonial state in our defense. In the following weeks and months, and indeed for several subsequent years, our movement created a situation of power in the city where there was an actual balance of power between the bourgeois colonial state and the party and Uhuru movement. We created a situation of dual power. It was in the wake of the enhanced political consciousness, mass organization, and influence of our party and movement that the city of St. Petersburg hired its first African police chief in an attempt to employ a neo-colonial solution of white power in blackface. It is testimony to the growth of our influence and enhanced political position that the chief of police immediately united with our demands for replacement of the public policy of police containment with a public policy of economic development for our occupied and exploited community. To the consternation of the police department and much of the white population and city council, he also initiated radical reform of the police department, firing many of the notorious initiators of violence against our community and disciplining all police who were disrespectful to our people. Situations of dual power are never permanent. If you have, it says power, doesn't it? It should say dual power, are never permanent. They are fleeting and temporary. We were not able to win all power to the people, and consequently the state has been able to reassert its general authority over our colonized community with a vengeance. However, because of the leadership of our party, the power of the colonial state has been forever compromised, and its limitations permanently etched into the consciousness of the people. We were so effective that it was 8 years after the 1996 murder of Tyrone Lewis before the police could kill another African in this city. The example of the party-led St. Petersburg resistance is extremely important. The resultant impact of our party's character and identity forged in this resistance is profound. We were able to affect every form of struggle in this resistance, from mass mobilization, armed struggle, and the electoral process. This is who we are, or in the vernacular of a certain sector of the community, this is how we roll. These are just some of the cases and struggles that exemplify the organizational, political, and ideological work that helped to forge the DNA of our party over the 40 years since our founding. It is also a reminder that this history of struggle for our liberation was forged in contention with the various and sundry organized representatives of the imperialist white ruling class, as well as with components of what has generally been considered the African liberation movement, Uhuru. So, we can have some discussion now, if you like. We open to that? Doing some discussion now? Where am I, Tammy? Okay, so it's open for discussion. Interesting. I'll move it forward if nobody wants to, you know, that's, yeah, okay.
Quick reminder to the people that are listening online that you can send your questions or comments to dj@uhururadio.com.
Uhuru.
Just a quick question. In case of preparation, since we know now we have now China, India, South Korea, going to Africa, grabbing line, getting our resources, will we extend our operation to them too?
Well, I mean, we could, but I think I think we're at the end game now. I really believe we're at the end game. Let me tell you, this is an interesting question. Because here's what we are confronted with. When we talk about the crisis of imperialism, what we really mean, of course, is the crisis of imperialism as it exists. Isn't that what we mean? That's when you talk about any phenomenon, you know, extant phenomenon, that's what you're talking about, the crisis of imperialism as it exists. And we talked about the crisis of imperialism being profoundly a consequence of the resistance of peoples who this parasite has hosted on for all these years. But another crisis of imperialism as it exists it's got hungrier contenders, got new hungry contenders like China, like India, and other forces who are really struggling with this imperialism, right, in all over the world. Much of what you see happening in Asia, I just read the other day, I think, where it's Malaysia, isn't it, where the woman Aung San Burma, which is also called Myanmar. Yeah, where, you know, for a long time, you know, this princess was under house arrest and couldn't do anything, etc. They don't call her a princess. And then you notice that Hillary Clinton, she goes to Myanmar, and then she meets with the generals who head the government, and then she meets with the woman who's under house arrest, and there's an arrangement made. Now the woman is not going to be under house arrest, and she can run for parliament, you know, there, etc. Part of this, you notice that Obama's new strategic defense plan concentrates primarily on what? Asia. That's why you got bases now in Australia they're talking about. That's why they're trying to come back into the Philippines and what have you. That's why the Korean boogeyman is being raised so they can justify more military stuff. And now they're talking about in Malaysia, ethnic Chinese are catching hell, are beginning to catch hell, and because of the economic influence there. China is a powerful economic influence in Asia, growing stronger every day. So there's this contest that the U.S. is making with China. And it's really a wild situation, isn't it? Because you just saw the presumed next president of China was just in Europe. And they're begging him. What are the Europeans begging? Listen, this is crazy. Remember when they used to say, you don't stand a Chinaman's chance, right? Like Malcolm said, Chinese stand more chances than anybody right now. They don't say that anymore. So here are the Europeans begging China to buy up all their debt, to help us, give us some money so that we can survive. So I'm just saying that there's a contradiction here that we really need to understand. And the primary contradiction is that of the imperialism as it exists, and even the emergence of China as this force adds to the contradiction of imperialism as it exists. China is hungry. Given an opportunity, China will replace the U.S. in the same kind of imperial role. Only thing I think that in looking at this, we really need to consider what we can do to contribute to the crisis of imperialism as it is, contribute to the crisis of imperialism as it is, and build our own revolutionary project that will deal on the ground with China and all the other entities in our Africa. So I'm glad to see China contesting the United States. I'm glad to see China contesting France and all these other places because it shakes up imperialism. But I know that China is a problem for us too on the continent of Africa. China is a big problem that we're going to have to deal with, but part of the dealing with that problem is building the revolutionary process and building the ASI throughout Africa so that Africa can define its own reality and attacking neo-colonial. Because what is happening in Africa, part of what is happening in Africa, as we know, is that the Chinese have now become another factor for neo-colonial survival. Many of them who, not only for survival, but you have a situation where the neo-colonial puppet leaders act less like puppets sometimes for Europe and for America, because they can always play the China card, because China will give them the resources, because they can get this or that from China. I just saw where China just built in Addis Ababa a new AU, so-called African Union headquarters, magnificent building. Here, the so-called leadership of the African world is in a place where China is treating them with China. They're bragging about it. They're laughing about it. Look at what China has done for us. And China is looting Africa. You know, China is using your own money, fool, dummies, you know, to build this entity. So China is going to be a problem. But I believe we can beat China to it. I believe that we have to build a revolutionary project of our own and let China and the U.S. tussle out while we define, and I'm not saying that we are spectators. I'm just saying that we have to define our own strategic interests in Africa and the rest of the world and unite with all the opponents of every sect of imperialism. The Chinese used to have a saying, unite the many to defeat the few. In this instance, the U.S. is the few, and Europe constitute the few. They are the imperialism in power. And whatever we can do to push them off the stage of history, while at the same time building up our own capacity, will make us capable of dealing like with China and everybody else that we have to contend with. Uhuru. Yes, comrade.
Reparation history was a real found one, and I think increasingly now it even seems more important. One of the things ways that we've never discussed it is in terms of the significance for the history, the historical indictment of imperialism, public indictment. Because that was the first, I don't know of another time that there was a trial of the United States.
Right. On trial. On trial. Right.
Say that, we ourselves understand that we're a separate entity and that we wanted to indict the United States government. I thought that was a very, very important thing. I also wanted to point out that that Obama was one of the came out vociferously against reparations.
Yeah. In Harlem. Durban. Yeah. We're going to close the door behind their asses so they can't come back in, but that's another story. Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I mean, we've got this situation with these spineless neo-colonial puppet leaders throughout the African world, spineless. They're absolutely spineless. Where they stand by and watch some court come and take some so-called African leader, their own cohort, and take him, to The Hague, take him someplace in the Netherlands and put him on trial, some kind of international criminal court. Something that the United States government didn't even recognize, wasn't even a signature to. But they're capturing people, talking about putting them on trial for offenses they've made. And then here you are in places like Belgium as a splendid example. I mean, Belgium is built, Belgium as an entity, Belgium as a state, the Belgian wealth and resources, the population of Belgium, is born of blood and bones of Africa and African people, specifically in the Congo, and they're going pontificating about black leaders and why you act this way and such a thing. And I agree. And more Africans are upset about this, by the way. They're upset about the notion, this one-sided thing that they're doing where they're taking these Negroes, puppets, and putting them on trial. We're going to put them on trial. You keep your hands off them. We're going to try them. And I think that increasingly also, this is something that I really want us to understand, that the sense of European or white American invincibility that stuff is eroding all over the world. Nobody is in that place anymore. You know, there used to be in the real world a time when people would be armed, the so-called struggle, and the white man show up and people throw down the guns and run. It doesn't happen like that anymore. There's not this respect anymore for the imperialist authority. And I think you're right, comrade, that we really have to push this. And if we have confidence in what we're doing, we don't have to worry, because there are going to be some people who will oppose it. Even when we were building for the tribunal in Brooklyn, New York, if you remember, we went to this Negro lawyer who's supposed to have been this radical lawyer whose name I will not call at this meeting. Although it's the same as one of the famous Western cowboy movie stars. But this person whose name, you know, we went to him, he was afraid to touch it because of what it might mean for his, his status as a lawyer in the United States. That's how significant it was. And I'm saying that there are going to be other petty bourgeois forces who right now are going to hesitate about taking the stand that we know must be taken. But if we know that we're on the cusp of a whole transformed world, then we can lead it. We must lead it, you know. And this indictment of imperialism is the fundamental thing, because nobody believes in it anymore anyway. Even Brzezinski doesn't believe in it anymore. Even Buchanan doesn't believe in it anymore. Even Fukuyama, who had written about the end of history, now is writing about the future of history. You know, and the history that he's talking about and anticipating is one where they're no longer in control. Right? Uhuru. Uhuru, comrade.
I really appreciate this section of the political report. And the thing that I think just really strikes me, and I have had the honor of working under the leadership of the party since 1976. So I've seen, some of these struggles. And what you have described here in terms of the struggle, this is only a little tiny, tiny bit of maybe even the most important one.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there would be so many different kinds of campaigns going on at the same time, simultaneously. But I think the thing that is so striking is in the earlier part where we were studying the political theory, that political theory was developed in the middle of that kind of struggle. And a lot of times you would be writing, and the police could be attacking, or some other kinds of attacks are coming down, and struggles are going on. That it wasn't, like you said, African internationalism demands action. It demands the work, the practice to liberate Africa and African people and to destroy imperialism. And I just wanted to if you could comment on that, because I think that just shows how unique. There's nothing like this theory of African internationalism, because this is just as much part of the theory that we just read as the earlier one.
Yeah.
I just think that is really.
I think that's important too, because I'm not an intellectual. I'm not an academic, and I think I'm thankful for that, because I might be considered an intellectual. I don't know, but I know I'm not an academic. And yeah, okay. And the thing is that there is no separation in our theory from our practice. There is no separation. This is one of the things that I think that distinguishes who we are, what we believe, and what we do, is that there are practical implications. We're always trying to solve the problems in the world. We don't come to some abstract question and say, let's solve this. For example, what is the sound of one hand clapping? Does a tree make a noise if it falls in the forest if there's no one to hear it? No, we haven't come to some, abstract stuff like this. We're not navel, picking, stargazers, we've been trying to change the world, and we had to come to understand the world based on that relationship. It's like the analogy that I used with Malcolm X talking about you have to understand this reality because you're sitting on the stove. And that's different from somebody writing about somebody sitting on the stove. You ever notice that you get somebody and you can do an interview, or they can observe you and then they write about what they think it was about? Ain't got a damn thing to do with it, because as a spectator has an entirely different relationship to reality than somebody who's experiencing that reality. And that's part of the value of the theory. When we talk about the theory of African internationalism, it's not something that we came through. I read Marx not because I was trying to understand the world or change the world. I was trying to change the world, and then I was saying, hey, maybe this will help. And not only did I have to do that, but I had to deal with all these white people and their followers who were coming around trying to say, no, Marx said and Lenin said, and say, well, maybe they got something, because I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. And so, you know, I had to investigate this in order to solve problems in the world. That's who we are, you know, and that's who the intellectuals, we have to create working class intellectuals. Demisha Black Earth was 19 years old when she traveled all over Europe. I think she might have spoken before the parliament, a parliament in the Netherlands or someplace like that. She was armed with the 14 points platform. She studied that. All of us studied it. If you understand the 14-point platforms of the African People's Socialist Party, you can make it any place in the world in terms of ideological discussions and struggle anywhere on earth. That's what Demisha, 19 years old. And she had, you know, interesting contests out in the world, because we're trying to solve problems. We're not just, you know, engaged in some kind of intellectual masturbation and what have you. It is the real world that has to be changed. And so we have to understand that world and our place in this world, our future in this world. That is how we come to African internationalism. And that is, and in the middle of, as Comrade Penny was saying, a lot of this stuff was written in the heat of actual battles, contests that we were engaged in, sometimes even in safe houses that we had to, you know, had to escape to in order to be able to take on some of these questions. So that's how it happened in the real world. Uhuru, comrade.
Just a question about ANPO and ANRO. I've been really struck by the work that we were trying to do around the National Justice Conference. Struck by the absence of organizations that we might not even want to talk about names, but RNA, NAPO. I don't even hear the president of these organizations saying anything about them, and I'm wondering, did ANPO and ANRO, the struggles that went on around any of the questions in those organizations, maybe those struggles, how do you see those struggles having an impact on the sort of the lessening of the influence of those organizations, and seemingly now the disappearing of those organizations?
Well, I don't know if it had that much to do with the lessening of those organizations. I think it did with the AAPRP. We know it did with the AAPRP. We know that, and we know that in fact, you know, that it was, you know, the different kinds of splits and things happening up inside that organization. But let me just say that one of the real things that we had to contend with throughout this process is that our movement did not have a history of ideological struggle. You know, like you can't develop without that. Ideological struggle is healthy, it's good, it's not something to be afraid of. Slander is bad. You know, instead of, we would engage the All-African People's Revolutionary Party in ideological struggle. Instead of responding to the ideological struggle, they would do things like tell people, oh, Ishitella, you know, used to be a part of the AAPRP, and he wanted to start his own thing, so that's why he took off and built the APSP. Or they say Ishitella was in the AAPRP, and there was a split that he broke off from us because he wanted to initiate an armed struggle in Liberia, and we were opposed to this. This is fictitious. I mean, just made it up. You know, or Ishitella, you know, it's a personal thing between Ishitella and Kwame, you know, Toure or Stokely Carmichael, which is nonsense. I mean, I think that it's important. Ideological struggle is really important. I mean, that's how we grow and develop, and that's how even taking on the struggles with the white left and these other forces. I think we're in a much better place today as a consequence of having engaged them in struggle. But instead, what would happen is when we would initiate ideological struggle, they would call us up and say, well, you're saying that in public. I mean, we could just have a meeting and deal with it behind closed doors. But the fact is, we were not dealing with some behind closed doors issues. We were dealing with questions of theory, of philosophy that was trying to inform the direction of a whole movement of all our people. That was the thing that was happening. They would get upset with us. And for example, when we were building for ANRO, Comrade Gaida may remember this. We had a meeting in New York where we were trying to pull all these Africans from everywhere together, because we didn't try to build ANRO, the reparations organization, as a party organization. Our objective was, because all of us believe in reparations, let's build this organization together, right? And we can, lead it collectively. And even though we got other kind of differences, our work would determine our relationship, even while we debate these other questions. But I'll never forget when this brother who I heard somebody refer to as the father of reparations in the United States, who came in the meeting, and when we were trying to have this discussion, he stood up and he had a 6-year-old, I think it might have been a 6-year-old issue of the Burning Spear. It was an old spear. And he says, in this newspaper, you were saying this and that about the Black Belt South, or the New African position, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, he stood and did a 15-minute rant on that, and then stormed out of the meeting. Well, you got a newspaper, we got a newspaper. In our newspaper, we put forward our views, because we are really trying to win masses of people to unite with this. And you should do the same thing. And if we say in our newspaper something that you find contradiction, put it in your newspaper. Make this struggle with us. Let's just have this debate. It's an important kind of debate for the growth of our movement. The biggest problem was that people were literally offended, personally offended. It was really treated like a real subjective thing, that you would dare say this. And what we're talking about are political differences. And there's nothing wrong with exploring political differences, because I might even learn something from you in defense of your position. You might teach me something. Truth is that I did learn some things from some of the New Africanist forces, and if they hang around and listen with their heads instead of, like with their emotions, they might be able to learn something as well. In fact, yeah. So that was like a really important thing. And if anything might have contributed to, if you're accurate in terms of your assessment about, the lack of vitality that they have now, it may be more because of an unwillingness to engage, like with contending ideas, right? It may be more of an unwillingness to engage in political and ideological struggle. It's not ideological struggle to go out and say, the white people in the APSP. If you're going to say something about the white people in the APSP, what you're supposed to do? You're supposed to say, they put forth their relationship with these white people based on this. This is what they say. We disagree with that. We disagree. We think that's wrong. We don't think that's the issue. What we think is this, this, and this. But they don't do that. They will play on base emotional, things in the African community, because white people have done some horrible things. And so as opposed to, and so they will play on the emotional thing that Africans would have, as opposed to debating the basis, like of the disagreement. They won't do that. They won't do that. And so that's been problematic. And I think that one of the things that's really been helpful for us is that we have been willing to engage in these ideological struggles with the forces. And some of these forces have proved heroic in the struggle. I mean, we talk about the New Africanists, but these are the forces who in Aretha Franklin's, not Aretha Franklin, was it Aretha Franklin's, whose church was that? But they had a shootout in Detroit. When the police raided that church in Detroit, and those comrades from the RNA, they picked up the guns and they killed FBI agents in the process of doing that. When the FBI attacked their place in Mississippi, these comrades picked up guns and actually, I think, killed an FBI agent. So, and these were, they got records of being, you know, fierce fighters around the question. But in our view, they were wrong, not on the police thing, but they were wrong in terms of where they were trying to go. It's not a personal thing. And some of them, I've had personal relationships really close. I really love these comrades in a certain way, but they were wrong. Stokely Carmichael was my man. I liked Stokely Carmichael with his arrogant, self-centered self. You know, I never met anybody as self-centered in my life as Stokely Carmichael, but I liked him. He was cool. He was charisma, you know, writ large. You know, nobody could be Stokely Carmichael like Stokely Carmichael could be Stokely Carmichael. We used to refer to him as Stokely Starmichael. So, I mean, so he was my guy, but he was wrong. And just because, and I'm not gonna overlook the errors there because I like the guy. And increasingly, depending on how they deal with these struggles, then I would like them more or less. Uhuru. And I think it's really important for us to come to grips with that, you know, because it's not a popularity contest. We're talking about the emancipation of our people. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And I will do everything I can to stop Africans from falling you off a damn cliff just because you got a nice beat, or you look good and colorful while you're going off the damn cliff. Uhuru, comrade, yeah.
So I appreciate the question from Murray. It just reminds me of something I wanted to say. I appreciate this discussion on the class question, but something is missing a lot when you go to the African organization around the world. For example, we've been traveling to Sierra and other places, and I think we need to generalize the class question discussion or class struggle in the community, systematize it by selecting examples that allow how people can engage in class struggle with the benefit of having a part. So I can take the example of the ANC versus the PEC. We can take the Mumbai, the Pyramid Hours. So we can take also the example just mentioned in the Afghanistan. All what happens between the African independent sector, but if we generalize it, we can go anywhere and allow our movement, wherever it is, to grow, wiser or,
I agree.
Because of the benefit of having access to the conclusion.
I agree. And this is critical because even everybody who's fighting in the interest of the working class, they're not necessarily clear on that. Marcus Garvey never called it a working class movement, but that's the kind of movement he built as opposed to the what? As opposed to what? The Du Bois Pan-Africanist Congress. And in fact, that was one of the reasons that Du Bois had contempt for the Garvey movement, because they were working people primarily. And that's what it was. All over the world is a working people's movement. And this whole question of class, and like, you take the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania, an organization I've had love for a long time. Mangaliso Sobukwe, giant, never talked about the working class movement as such, but the political line. See, what we had was the ANC was connected to liberal imperialism. And so their whole movement was a reflection of that, everything that they did. And the PAC actually represented the interests of the broad masses of African people in what they call South Africa. Now, particularly during the most important parts of its history, but it didn't characterize itself as a class-based organization. It came out of the ANC. They split around the question of South Africa being the property of the white people and everybody else, or whether the struggle was for taking back our land. For whom was this question of taking back our land most significant? Except the African workers and peasants. That's where the question really resounded, where the liberal sector of the African petty bourgeoisie was like the NAACP. They just wanted a piece of the action. They just wanted to integrate into what already existed. So even if they weren't talking about the working class, people like Sobukwe, they were raising up what were fundamentally class issues, working class issues, Garvey fundamental working class issues at the time. Because one of the things that happens also is that in the anti-colonial struggle, you have a sector that is a patriotic bourgeoisie, if you will, patriotic petty bourgeoisie, who hates white power, who hates white imperialism, who want to get the white man out of our affairs, but are not prepared to talk about social transformation. And so therefore they're simply talking about replacing the white, companies and corporations with those owned by black people, such as what you see now, with the ANC, a handful of them. So but the ANC, they weren't even patriotic. Do you understand what I'm saying? They were not even patriotic. Their patriotism stemmed from the fact that they were fighting for black people to take over as opposed to the white people taking over. That was the patriotism of the PAC. But, and moving correctly, they could have achieved, I believe, a revolutionary class consciousness. I believe Sobukwe would have gone there.